The marble hall of the Harrington mansion gleamed like a museum, but tonight its shine felt cruel. Clara Johnson, the black maid who had quietly served the family for over a decade, stood trembling as the head butler delivered the cold verdict. Her services were no longer required. The words hit her chest like stones, crushing the last thread of security she clung to. Clara's hands shook as she clutched the apron she wore daily, the fabric damp with her tears. With no thought for pride, she fell to her knees on the polished floor, voice breaking into the silence. "Please let me stay." The other servants turned their faces away, fearful of the scene. Yet in that moment, her cry carried more than desperation. It took years of sacrifice, of motherhood, of survival. This was the beginning of Black Maid Cries, "Please let me stay." The billionaire's next move stuns the whole mansion. Before we dive in, show some love with a like and drop a comment on which country you're watching from. We absolutely love seeing our community from all over the world come together here. All right, are you ready? Let's jump right in. Long before Clara Johnson stood on the marble floors of the Harrington mansion, begging for her livelihood, her life had been a patchwork of hardship, stitched together by sheer determination. Born in a small town on the outskirts of Atlanta, Clara grew up in a world that never gave her anything freely. Her parents worked themselves to exhaustion, her mother as a seamstress and her father at a steel plant, but poverty still shadowed their every step. From an early age, Clara knew what it meant to go to bed hungry or to walk to school in shoes that pinched because they were too small. Despite the hardship, Clara possessed a quiet strength. She married young, a man named Marcus, whose laugh was big enough to fill the tiniest of rented apartments. Together, they dreamed of giving their only son, Malik, a brighter future than either of them had known. But dreams, like fragile glass, can shatter in an instant. When Malik was only 7, Marcus collapsed at work from an undiagnosed heart condition. Clara was left a widow, her grief drowned by the pressing need to provide. With no college education, Clara took on cleaning jobs. She scrubbed bathrooms in motels, mopped floors in diners, and pressed uniforms in laundries. Yet no matter how many hours she worked, her income barely covered rent and food. Malik, sharp-eyed and ambitious even as a child, would often tell her, "Mama, one day I'll be the one taking care of you." She smiled at his words, though deep inside she feared the relentless cycle of poverty would strangle his chances. It was during one of her job hunts that Clara heard about an opening at the Harrington estate. The Harringtons were known for their wealth, old money, the kind that stretched back generations. To Clara, their world of chandeliers and polished mahogany felt unreachable, but she applied anyway, desperate for stability. To her surprise, she was hired. The work was grueling, but it paid more than her past jobs. Every paycheck was carefully divided, a portion for rent, a portion for groceries, and the rest for Malik's schooling. Clara skipped meals so Malik could eat and wore worn-out shoes so Malik could have notebooks. Every sacrifice was worth it when she saw him excelling in school, but Clara carried wounds invisible to the eye. She lived with a constant hum of fear that one wrong step, one mistake would send everything crashing down. In the Harrington mansion, she was always aware of her place, the servant in the background, expected to be silent, invisible, yet flawless in her duties. Still, she endured, because this job wasn't about her pride, it was about Malik's future. And so, when the head butler announced her dismissal, the weight of all those years pressed on Clara at once. She wasn't just pleading for employment, she was arguing for the continuation of her son's dreams. That was why, on that polished marble floor, the world first heard the desperate cry, "Black Maid Cries, please let me stay." The billionaire's next move stuns the whole mansion. The sound of heavy doors opening echoed through the vast hall, silencing the whispers. Every servant straightened their posture, their eyes darting nervously toward the entrance. Richard Harrington, the master of the estate, had returned. Richard was not a man easily overlooked. Tall, silver-haired, and carrying himself with the quiet authority of someone who knew his presence shifted the air, he seemed carved from the same marble that adorned his home. Yet behind the commanding exterior was a man whose solitude weighed heavily. Since the passing of his wife Eleanor, Richard had buried himself in business trips, negotiations, and the maintenance of his empire. The mansion was his castle, but it often felt like a mausoleum. Now as he stepped inside, suitcase still in hand, his sharp gaze caught the scene before him. Clara on her knees, tears wetting the polished floor. The head butler stiffened, quickly bowing. "Mr. Harrington, I apologize. There was an issue with the staff." Richard raised an eyebrow. His tone was calm but carried a blade's edge. "What kind of issue?" Clara scrambled to her feet, though her legs shook beneath her. She pressed her palms together, voice cracking as she repeated, "Please, sir, don't send me away. Please let me stay." The room froze. The other maids and footmen exchanged glances, but dared not speak. To plead so openly in front of the master was unheard of, a breach of invisible walls that separated employer from servant. But Clara's desperation hung heavy in the air, impossible to ignore. Richard studied her for a long, silent moment. His eyes, steel grey and calculating, softened almost imperceptibly as he noticed the way her hands trembled, the exhaustion etched on her face, and the quiet dignity beneath her fear. The butler cleared his throat nervously. "Sir, there were concerns about her performance. I believed dismissal was appropriate." Appropriate. Richard's voice cut through the air. He set down his suitcase with deliberate care, never taking his eyes off Clara. "Appropriate to cast someone out without my knowledge." The butler stammered, his face pale. Clara lowered her gaze, bracing herself for Richard's judgment. She knew this was the moment that would decide everything, whether she could keep her son's future alive or watch it crumble. Then, unexpectedly, Richard's attention lingered on the small silver chain around Clara's neck. At the end of it hung a delicate locket, its surface worn with age. Recognition flickered in his eyes, though he said nothing. Instead, he took a step closer, his voice quieter now. "Tell me, Clara, why do you beg to stay?" Her lips quivered, but she spoke the truth. "Because this job is the only way I can keep my son in school. Everything I do for him. Without it, we lose everything." Richard said nothing. The room seemed to hold its breath. It was in this fragile silence that the mansion would soon learn. Black Maid cries, "Please. Let me stay. The billionaire's next move stuns the whole mansion." Richard Harrington stood silently, his eyes fixed on the locket resting against Clara's chest. Its surface glimmered faintly under the chandelier light, though dulled by years of wear. Something stirred deep inside him, a memory long buried. Beneath board meetings, endless contracts, and lonely nights. "Where did you get that necklace?" Richard asked quietly. Clara instinctively reached for it, fingers curling protectively around the locket. "It was given to me when I was young," she said softly. "A gift, from someone who believed in me even when I had nothing." The billionaire's gaze sharpened. He knew that locket. Decades earlier, it had belonged to Eleanor Harrington, his late wife. Eleanor had given out only a handful of those pieces, each tied to a scholarship she had quietly funded for struggling young women. Richard remembered her words vividly. "Sometimes love isn't about what we can give to each other. It's about giving someone a chance to stand on their own." And now, standing before him, Clara Johnson, the woman who had just cried, "Please let me stay," was one of those recipients. Richard's chest tightened. This wasn't just a servant begging for a job. This was a living echo of Eleanor's. Compassion. Clara, unaware of the recognition dawning in Richard's eyes, lowered her gaze in shame. "I've worked here for over 10 years, sir. I've tried never to be a burden. I know I'm just the maid. But I've put everything into this work because it means a future for my boy. That's all I ask. A chance to keep that future alive." Her voice broke on the last words, and she clasped her hands as though in prayer. The mansion staff shifted uncomfortably. To them, the scene was dangerous, unheard of. To plead so openly risked punishment, humiliation, or worse. Yet Richard didn't scold her. Instead, he felt a weight pressing against his ribs, the sudden collision of past and present. He stepped closer. His voice softened, tinged with something unfamiliar to the staff who had only ever known his sternness. "Clara, What is your son's name?" Her eyes lifted, shining with tears. "Malik. He's 17, bright, hard-working. He dreams of becoming a doctor. I don't know if I can keep that dream alive, but I have to try." Richard exhaled slowly. The name struck him like a chord. Malik. It carried the same hope Eleanor used to talk about, the idea that education could break the cycle of despair. The staff looked on, puzzled. They could not understand the shift happening before their eyes. The way the billionaire's mask of authority cracked ever so slightly, replaced by something gentler, almost reverent. No one yet knew the truth, that Eleanor's legacy had already touched Clara's son. No one yet realized how deep the connection ran, but they would. And soon the entire household would understand why Black Maid cries, "Please let me stay." The billionaire's next move stuns the whole mansion. The hall remained hushed, every servant still as stone, waiting for Richard Harrington's judgment. But Richard didn't speak right away. Instead, his gaze drifted past Clara, as though he could see beyond the walls of the mansion to the boy she had just spoken of, Malik. "Your son," Richard said at last, his voice measured. "Does he know how much you sacrifice for him?" Clara swallowed hard. "I don't tell him everything. He's a good boy, sir. Works hard at school. Dreams big. I want him to believe the world has a place for him. That's why I can't lose this job." Richard nodded slowly, as though her words confirmed something he already suspected. He turned to the butler, whose face had gone pale. "Fetch the files from my study," he commanded. "The Harrington Foundation scholarships. Bring me the most recent reports." The butler blinked, confused, but obeyed. Minutes later, he returned with a leather-bound folder. Richard opened it and scanned the neatly typed pages, his finger pausing on a familiar name. His chest tightened. There it was, in black ink. Malik Johnson, full scholarship recipient, Harrington Foundation, Eleanor Memorial Fund. Richard closed the folder gently, almost reverently. Then he looked back at Clara, whose brow furrowed in confusion. "Clara," he said softly, "your son's education. It's already secured. The Harrington Foundation has been covering his tuition in full." Her breath caught. "What?" The words slipped from her lips in disbelief. "No, that can't be. I thought... You thought it was the school or some anonymous donor," Richard finished for her. "But the truth is, it was Eleanor's doing. My late wife created the fund in her final years. She believed in helping families who deserved more than the world had given them. Your son is one of those she chose." Clara's knees buckled, and she clutched the edge of a chair for support. Tears welled in her eyes, this time not of despair but of stunned relief. "All these years, all this time, it was her. It was you?" Richard's expression softened, the lines of grief on his face deepening. "It was Eleanor. I only carried her wish forward. And now I see... It led us here, to this moment," the servants whispered among themselves, astonished. The story was unfolding in ways no one had expected. The plea that had begun with humiliation was now revealing a hidden bond between master and maid, between legacy and survival. Clara covered her mouth, sobbing softly. She thought of Malik studying late at night, books spread across the kitchen table, his eyes lit with dreams. She thought of all the time she'd gone without so he could have a chance, and now she knew his chance had been protected all along. It was in this moment that the mansion began to understand. Black Maid cries, "Please let me stay." The billionaire's next move stuns the whole mansion. For a long moment, the silence in the Harrington mansion was almost holy. Clara's sobs echoed faintly, raw with disbelief and gratitude, while Richard Harrington stood motionless, his gaze lowered to the locket once more. It was as if Eleanor herself was present in the room, whispering through memory, guiding his choice. The butler shifted uneasily, waiting for the command to remove Clara, but Richard finally spoke, his voice steady, carrying a weight no one expected. "Clara Johnson will not be dismissed," he declared. "In fact, from this day forward, she will serve as household manager. Gasps rippled across the servants gathered in the hall. The household manager was a position of authority, overseeing the entire staff. It was not just a job, it was a matter of respect, recognition, and dignity. Clara's eyes widened, her breath catching. "Sir, I don't know what to say." "Say nothing yet," Richard replied gently. "You've already said everything in your years of service. You've sacrificed more than most people could imagine, and you've done it with grace. My wife believed in you once. I would be dishonoring her memory if I did not continue to believe in you now." The butler, flustered, opened his mouth as if to protest, but Richard raised a hand and silenced him with a glance. "Clara has earned this through loyalty and perseverance. Let there be no doubt about her place here." Clara's tears flowed freely, but this time they weren't born of fear. They were tears of relief, of restoration. She stood taller, shoulders no longer bowed beneath invisible chains of shame. For the first time in years, she felt more than just a servant. She felt seen. Richard's decision carried deeper meaning than anyone realized. By elevating Clara to a leadership role, he also lifted the spirits of everyone in the household. The mansion, once divided by invisible walls of status and fear, felt for that moment like a place of humanity. Richard continued, his tone quiet but firm. "Clara, I will also make sure Malik has every opportunity he needs. Education is only the beginning. Eleanor believed that kindness is the greatest inheritance we can leave behind. Tonight, I remember that truth." The servants, who had once averted their eyes from Clara's desperation, now watched her with awe. The woman they had pitied only hours earlier now stood as a symbol of resilience. Clara pressed her trembling hands to her chest. "Thank you, sir. Thank you from the bottom of my heart. You'll never regret this." Richard gave the faintest of smiles, something rare in the mansion. "No, Clara. I think this is the first decision in years that I know I will never regret." And so, in the quiet transformation of a single night, the mansion was forever marked by a story whispered across its halls. Black Maid cries, "Please let me stay. The billionaire's next move stuns the whole mansion." The following morning, the mansion felt different. Word had spread quickly among the staff, carried in hushed whispers and wide-eyed glances. Clara Johnson was no longer just the maid. She had been lifted, honored, and entrusted. For the first time in years, the atmosphere inside those towering walls carried a touch of warmth. Clara herself moved through the halls as though she were rediscovering her own strength. She was still the same woman who scrubbed floors and polished silver, but now she carried her head high. Pride, not in wealth or position, but in survival, in perseverance, in dignity restored. That evening, in the quiet of her modest home, Clara sat with her son Malik at the kitchen table. She told him everything: the dismissal, her desperate plea, the shocking revelation, and Richard Harrington's decision. Malik listened in stunned silence, his eyes filling with tears. "Mama," he whispered, gripping her hand tightly, "you never gave up on me, and now because of you I'll never give up on my dream." Clara smiled through her tears. In that moment, she realized the story wasn't about her humiliation, nor even about her new position. It was about the future she had fought for, the boy she had raised with unwavering love, and the legacy of kindness that had reached them in ways she never expected. Back at the mansion, Richard sat alone in his study, Eleanor's photograph on, the desk before him. For the first time in years, he allowed himself a smile that wasn't hollow. Clara's plea had awakened something in him, reminding him that wealth meant nothing without compassion, that Eleanor's vision still breathed in the lives it touched. The mansion, once a place of distance and hierarchy, now carried a story of connection, of humanity. And as Clara whispered the tale to Malik one last time before bed, her voice trembled not with despair but with awe. "Black Maid cries, please let me stay. The billionaire's next move stuns the whole mansion." And so it became more than a headline, more than a whispered story. It became a truth etched into hearts, that kindness once sown will always find its way back. If this story touched your heart, Share it with someone who needs a reminder that kindness still exists. Please tell us your thoughts and your country in the comments below. Don't forget to like and subscribe so you never miss more inspiring stories. Your support keeps us going. Until next time, stay kind, stay hopeful, and remember, even the smallest act of compassion can change everything.